Okay, so I think we are ready. Hello everyone again and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Shira Aroni Makluf. I'm a Director of Business Development at the FreeMind Group and I'm pleased to be presenting in front of you today. Today we will be discussing introduction to SBIR and STTR funding opportunity. The slide deck is available for immediate download in the webinar sidebar under handouts. And also, I sent you the link for the next webinar we'll have on in a couple of weeks, and you can register through the link in the chat section. I think we're ready to start. If you want to learn more about the FreeMind Group, you can visit our website or either contact us through Twitter, LinkedIn, or watch our videos on YouTube. Okay, so let's start. So a little background on the FreeMind Group. FreeMind is a consulting firm specializing in non-dilutive funding. Actually, we are the global leader in non-dilutive funding in the world. We are in the business about 20 years now with 70 full-time employees, and we have very diverse client base. Academic institutes, universities, and industry, everything from small startups all the way up to big pharmaceutical companies. We submit over 500 applications every year, and that's a great deal of experience and knowledge and expertise, which we put together to increase your chances winning awards from all the relevant sources. So basically, how do we do that? First, we start by identifying the most relevant funding opportunities for you, for your company and project. We strategize to maximize the application's chance of success and manage complex project production process. Of course, we help to lead joint application writing and support final contract negotiations. We see non-dilutive funding as a strategic financial tool. So let's talk about the sources that we target. The main sources, well, the total pocket of money is $50 billion annually. Most of it comes from the NIH, and the NIH budget for 2018 is $37 billion, and about $28 billion go to exactly extramural research. That means research that is done outside the NIH itself, such as research project grants and R&D contracts. If we look at the categorical spending of the NIH, you can see so many different indications here. For example, neurosciences, you can see that the categorical spending for neurosciences is about $5 billion a year. Infectious diseases also about $6 billion a year, etc., etc. The main take-home message from this slide is that no matter what is your indication, no matter what is the subject of your project, the NIH, which is built of 27 different institutes, can potentially fund your project as it covers all the indications in the life sciences. So after we presented the sources and mainly the NIH, today we will be discussing the SBIR and STTR mechanism. The SBIR stands for Small Business Innovation Research, and STTR is basically Small Business Technology Transfer. We will discuss the different features of each one of them, the eligibility criteria for SBIR and STTR applications, and we will review the various SBIR and STTR opportunities out there. And I'll share some interesting information on these two amazing mechanisms. Now, it's important to remember that although SBIR and even though it's an SBIR and STTR webinar, you should keep in mind that the SBIR and STTR are great sources of funding. They are only a small percentage of the funds awarded by the NIH and other government agencies. So do not ignore other mechanisms such as R1 and R21 in the NIH, because we see a lot of value in them as well. So a little background on the SBIR and STTR program. They are congressionally mandated set-aside programs, which means by law, money must be set aside for these programs every year, both for SBIR and STTR. This is in order to strengthen the role of innovative small businesses in federally funded R&D. Federal agencies with extramural R&D budget of more than $100 million are required by law to allocate about 3.2% of their budget to SBIR program every year, such as, for example, the CDC and the NIH. Well, the STTR program requires government agencies with extramural R&D budget of more than $1 billion or more to set aside about 0.45% of their extramural research budget for STTR awards, again, every year. So the SBIR and the STTR programs are only available for domestic small business concerns, SBC, or SBC. And while the SBIR and STTR goal is to help small businesses engage in R&D, they are especially looking to fund R&D which has the potential for commercialization. That's a very important goal of this program. And while we will be focusing mostly on the NIH and we'll touch upon a bit the NSF, keep in mind that also the CDC and Department of Defense and also the FDA, they also have SBIR programs and, of course, STTRs. So the mission of the SBIR program is to support scientific excellence and technological innovation through the investment of federal research funds in critical American priorities to build a strong national economy. Among the goals of the SBIR and STTR are to stimulate the technological innovation in order to meet federal R&D needs. What they're looking for is the commercialization of innovations, and they want to help small businesses participate in the growth and development of the U.S. economy. And last thing, they want to help socially and economically disadvantaged small businesses concerned, SBCs, as well as women-owned businesses. So while SBIR and STTR have some similar goals, their objectives differ in that SBIRs are intended to increase private sector and private sector commercialization of innovations derived from federally funded R&D by funding early-stage small businesses that are seeking to commercialize innovative biomedical technologies, while STTRs are intended to stimulate a partnership of ideas and technologies between innovative SBC, small businesses, and nonprofit research institutes through federally funded R&D, and therefore require that the small business formally collaborate with a research institute in phase 1 or phase 2. So in order to be eligible for an SBIR or STTR, the entity applying for the grant must be a for-profit company, and it must be located in the US. It must also have no more than 500 employees, including affiliates. It must be more than 50% owned and controlled by one or more individuals who are citizens or permanent resident of the US in the United States, or more than 50% owned and controlled by other for-profit business that is more than 50% owned and controlled by one or more individuals who are citizens of the US. It may even be owned by multiple VC, private equity firms, hedge funds, as long as no one of these owns more than 50%. I know it's pretty complicated, but you can find everything in the SBA website with all the eligibility criteria. Also, it's very important to note all of these eligibility requirements must be met at the time of the award. That means that, for example, if you have 450 employees, but by the time of the award that you get the award, you will have over 500 employees, that will be an issue for you. So SBIR and STTRs are similar in many ways. However, they differ in two major ways. First of all, as related to the principal investigator, the PI. For an SBIR, the PI must be primarily employed with the SBC at the time of the award, of course, and for the duration of the project period, unless a waiver is granted by the NIH. When they say primarily employed, they mean that the PI must spend more than half of his time, of course, his or her time at the company, or in other words, the PI must not be a full-time employee of another organization. On the other hand, for an STTR, primary employment is not required, so the PI may be either from the small business or from the collaborating nonprofit research institute. Additionally, SBIRs require that at least 2/3 of the work must be done by the SBC in-house, while STTR require that at least 40% of the work is supposed to be done by these small businesses and at least 30% by the research institute. We'll have a slide showing the numbers in a couple of slides. And it's very important to remember that all of these requirements must be, of course, you must to meet these eligibility criteria at the time of the awards. And one last thing, it's very important to remember that all work must be done in the US. So, well, as I mentioned earlier, the SBIR and STTR programs are available from many different government agencies and sources, including NIH, NSF, DoD, and of course other sources. However, today we will be focusing mostly on the NIH, but also a bit on the NSF. NIH, approximately $900 million go to NIH, SBIR, and STTR awardees every year. The NIH, SBIR, and STTR programs are structured in 3 phases, and we'll talk about the phase 1 objective right now. And the objective is to establish the technical merit, feasibility, and commercial potential of the proposed R&D efforts, and to determine the quality of performance of the small businesses awardee prior to providing further federal support in phase 2, of course. And as far as funding, SBIR and STTR phase 1 awards are similar in that they normally do not exceed $150,000 total cost. However, with appropriate justification, awards can exceed this by 50% or up to $225,000. And as far as time period goes, SBIR phase 1 are for a period of about up to 6 months, and SBIR phase 1 are for a period of time of 1 year. And of course, the budget is the same for both of them for phase 1. The objective of phase 2 is to continue, of course, the R&D efforts initiated in phase 1. That's why basically you should submit a phase 1 application right after you submitted a phase 1 application, or SBIR application or STTR. And this funding is based on the result achieved, of course, in the phase 1 and the scientific merit and commercial potential of the project proposed in phase 2. As I said, only phase 1 awardees are eligible for a phase 2 award. SBIR and STTR budget phase 2, the awards normally do not exceed $1 million total cost for 2 years, but with appropriate, again, justification from the applicant, Congress will be allow awards to exceed this amount by up to 50% or up to $1.5 million for phase 2. And there is also a second phase 2 award, whereby agencies may award a second phase 2 to continue a phase 2 project. This is not so well known, but it's not something that it's not something new. The NIH has been offering this opportunity for several years. You may know this also as a phase 2B award or competing renewal or a phase 2B bridge award. The purpose of this award is to support the next stage of development for federally funded SBIR Phase 2 project, to address the funding gap known as the valley of death between the end of the SBIR Phase 2 award and the subsequent round of financing needed for commercialization. Usually it requires also matching funds. It's important to mention that as well. So let's talk about the fast track. The fast track incorporates a submission and review process in which both phase 1 and phase 2 grant application are submitted together and reviewed, of course, together as one application. Because both phases undergo review at the same time, the NIH fast track mechanism can reduce or even eliminate the funding gap between phases. We ask our clients before they submit a fast track, we ask them 2 questions. First, can you show a smooth transition between phase 1 and phase 2? Of course, in regards to the stage of development you are right now. But also, can you show a clear commercialization plan? These are 2 really important questions you need to verify before you submit a fast track application. It's worth pointing out that the NSF, which does have SBIR and STTR programs, it doesn't have and doesn't offer a fast track option. When we'll go over some of the solicitations in a few minutes, I'll point out which programs offer the fast track option, so stay tuned. So we have, for the standard SBIR and STTR applications, we have standard due dates, which are every 4 months. The next one is September 5th, but afterwards we'll have January 5th and April 5th. It takes about 3 to 4 months from the moment you actually submitted the application until your application will be reviewed by the NIH reviewers and, of course, will be scored. So 3 to 4 months after it will be reviewed, it will be scored, and after another 3 to 4 months, your application could be awarded, and potentially you can see the money in your bank account. So in total, it's a process of about 6 to 8 months, but we heard that the NIH program officers said that their objective for 2018 and even for 2017 is to reduce that time and basically do it in about 6 months. It's important to remember that some of the solicitations, the specific solicitations for specific indications, for example, they have non-standard due dates. So I suggest that you carefully read each solicitation and pay attention to the details. And if you don't, you may miss the deadline or other important information. So now let's look at some of the funding opportunities. Basically, they fall into 2 general categories. One is solicited and the other one is unsolicited. Unsolicited opportunity is also known as investigator-initiated opportunities or omnibus solicitations or even parent announcements, where an investigator submits a research application with no specific solicitation. Many NIH institutes participate in the parent announcement. So if you can really find a specific solicitation that could fit especially to your project, so you don't need to worry, just need to go and find your omnibus route. It's important to know that and also understand that approximately about 2/3 of all awards across the NIH are unsolicited. So even if you look around and you don't find, as I said, the exact solicitation for your project, utilize the unsolicited mechanism and don't miss out on them. So let's start off looking at some of the omnibus solicitations. As you can, maybe before that, you can see here the numbers for the total awards in 2016, about, well, almost 2,000 awards given by the unsolicited mechanism. And it's about 67% of all the awards given by the NIH. As I said, many institutes participate in the parent announcement mechanism. This is, for example, the SBIR and STTR parent announcement. As you can see here, many institutes within the NIH participate in this application: the National Cancer Institute, National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. I mean, almost, I would say, the most important institute in the NIH are here. The NIDDK, NIDA, NIMH. So definitely use this mechanism. So let's start with the SBIR parent announcement. Well, basically, it's really important that you can use, again, most of the NIH Institute participate in this parent announcement. The deadline is September 5th, the standard deadline, and also the budget is standard. As I said, for phase 1 is up to $225,000 up to 6 months, and for phase 2 is up to $1.5 million up to 2 years. And it's important to know that recently the NIH separated solicitations for 2 different applications. One is for preclinical work, and the other one is for clinical work. So please note, each parent announcement has 2 opportunities, one with clinical trial required, and the other one where it is not allowed, as you can see here. Well, this is the STTR parent announcement. Again, you can see two opportunities. One is for where clinical trials are not allowed, and the other one where it is required. The budget is basically the same. Instead of $225,000 for 6 months, like the SBIR, here it's up to 1 year. The deadline is the same, September 5th. So in terms of the deadline and the time frame we have until then, I think it's a good time now to start preparing and working on the application in order to meet this deadline. So I presented to you the 2 parent announcements of the NIH. The NSF, or the National Science Foundation, funds roughly about 400 companies every year via its SBIR or STTR program for approximately $190 million. Here we have the NSF SBIR Phase 1 solicitation. The R&D in the application, that's their first requirement, should be based on innovative technology with potential for great commercial and or social benefits. The program invites proposals from small businesses across a broad range of science and engineering disciplines. If you are successful, you will receive a grant of about up to $225,000 for a 6 months to 8 months period. And on that would be for development, feasibility project, and basically the period, it's 6 to 12 months, as you can see here. The period will be decided by the applicant. So you can then compete for a second grant for phase 2. up to $750,000 over 2 years period, with the aim of advancing the technology toward commercial development. Well, the solicitation asks for information about your track record of commercialization. But if you are a startup, you shouldn't worry. They encourage proposals from both new and seasoned entrepreneurs. What is most important is that you have a transformative idea or innovation, and that your team's primary goal is to is the commercialization of the technology. This is a very broad solicitation. However, there are certain selected topics that the NSF is looking to fund, including, for example, advanced materials and biological technologies, smart health, biomedical technologies again, and basically, in order to see the application, I put here the link for the website. So you can definitely download the PDF file and copy that link and really read it through. And well, the deadline is July 10th. Usually their standard deadline for the NSF applications for SBIR and STTR, the deadlines are June and December. This year they decided to postpone the first deadline for July 10th. So that would be your next deadline. Well, to sum it up, as I mentioned, the NSF and SBIR, SBIR and STTR programs has 2 deadlines in the year, July and December this year. In terms of funding, as you can see here, the funding is different for 6 months, for 12 months, for phase 1, and the same budget for phase 2. And as for the PI, a PI must, for of course the NSF program, a PI must devote a minimum of 1 calendar month of effort per 6 months of performance to an SBIR phase 1 project, and that's just for example. As you can see here, and for STTR, it's a minimum of 2 calendar months on the project. We'll see, well, the goals are different. Phase 1, feasibility and commercialization plan, and phase 2 is for prototype development. Fast track here is not available. And that, I guess, sum up the NSF, SBIR, and STTR program. So as I said, we have basically the 2 parent announcements, 2 for SBIRs and 2 for STTRs. And of course, each one of them is for either preclinical work or clinical work. And that's the parent announcement, where you just submit an application, of course, in the scope of interest of the funding institute. But also we have specific solicitations, SBIR and STTR solicitations, as you can see here. As for today, there are 92 open SBIR and STTR solicitations just from the NIH. As you can see here, there are different institutes, NIDDK, NIAID, specific indications, specific solicitations. So you can definitely go to the NIH website and look for the right SBIR or STTR solicitation that could fit your project. Just for example, one of the specific solicitations is the Blueprint Neurotherapeutic Network, small molecule drug discovery and development for disorders of the nervous system. It's a U44 clinical trial optional, where basically it's a U44, it's a kind of different mechanism. It's a cooperative agreement with the NIH, but also it's again an SBIR. And again, here, clinical trials is optional. And participants in this BPN are responsible for conducting all studies that involve disease or target-specific assays, models, or other research tool, and receive funding from all activities to be conducted on their own laboratories. Also, the budget here basically, before the budget, projects can enter either at the discovery stage to optimize, I don't know, promising hit compounds through medical chemistry, or at the development stage to advance the development candidate through IND enabling toxicology studies and phase 1 clinical testing. The budget here is different. Please pay attention. The applicants should rarely exceed up to $500 total cost per year for phase 1, of course, and up to 1.5 total cost per year for a phase 2. The duration is up to 2 years for phase 1 and up to 3 years for phase 2. So there is definitely a different budget from the parent announcement that we saw, the SBIR parent announcement. But also, please note that the deadline here is different. It's not September 5th, 2018, it's September 7th, 2018. So that's why I said that if you find a specific solicitation that could fit your science, could fit your project, please pay attention to the deadline, to the budget, to all the requirements to see that really you can actually fund your project through this mechanism and through this specific solicitation. So, well, I don't know if you know, but I assume you do, but SBIR and STTRs are not easy to get. Actually, none of the government grants are easy. Each one of the government grants programs has its requirement and challenges. And basically, SBIRs and STTRs have some inherent challenges. As I mentioned earlier, for SBIRs in phase 1, the company is responsible for at least 67% of the work, and it must be completed in-house. While for phase 2, about at least 50% must be conducted in-house. That means that the rest, for phase 1, the rest of 33% could be conducted by a CRO, for example. In phase 2, 50% of the work can be conducted by your CRO. So it's really important to pay attention that you need to justify that in the application, that most of the work for phase 1, for example, will be conducted in-house. For STTR, for example, the small business, as I said, it's basically a collaboration between a small business, and a nonprofit institute or organization. So for STTRs, the small business must perform at least 40% of the work, and the U.S. Research Institute must perform at least 30%. The remaining 30% of the work may be performed either by the small business or the collaborating nonprofit research institute, or by any additional third party. Of course, this doesn't mean that a virtual company is ineligible to submit either SBIR or STTR. However, you need to know how to deal with it, and we can actually help our clients to deal with this challenge. Regarding the milestones, one of the goals of the SBIR and STTR program is basically commercialization of innovations. These programs are very interested in product development. Therefore, showing milestones and meeting them is very important. Also, there are several atypical and uncommon sections that must be submitted with the application. Just for example, in a phase 2 proposal, one must submit a 10 pages long commercialization plan. There are numerous items that must be addressed when assembling this document, and the language used should be very businesslike and less scientific as the rest of the application. The consortium or the collaboration is also a vital part of the application when present effort in-house vs work outsourced, and also to ensure that all aspects of your application are covered from an expertise perspective. It's sometimes wise to implement a plan of multi-PIs. Finally, it's important to make sure that the application you submit is coherent application that is also responsive to the solicitation's requirement and guidelines, and that's also true for both, well, for SBIR mechanism or STTR or the rest of the other mechanisms, R1, R21, or BAA for Department of Defense. So now, after we review the SBIR and STTR mechanism, let's talk about the NIH review process. Basically, after the application is submitted, there will be an external peer reviewed with experts from the project's field. They are examining the risk and the strength of the application by measuring 5 main parameters. First one is whether the project is innovative. Does it significant to the scientific world, to the science world? Does your project could become a solution for unmet medical need? Or do you have the right leadership to manage the project? If the PI has the right expertise, and if you have the right environment, the lab space, the tools to actually support your research. And most importantly, they examine your scientific approach, your scientific aims and goals that you want to achieve. And at the end of the day, we know that great science win awards, but it doesn't mean your application should focus just on that. In order to really score high in these 5 parameters, you should also know how to write your application, how to present your science in the best way there is, and to make it compelling and attractive to the NIH reviewers. We strongly recommend to turn non-dilutive funding into a strategic source of funding. Well, our clients invest about 5% of their fundraising effort in securing non-dilutive funding in order really to maximize the company's funding potential. And more than that, non-dilutive funding, it has an added value that could be translated into additional private investment or even an exit in the near future, because we know that non-dilutive funding from the NIH, from the Department of Defense, for example, is basically a stamp of approval from the government of the US. So how can you maximize your chances for award? So you need to, of course, write the best application ever, really take into account the 5 parameters I presented, but also lower your risk. How? By knowing your weaknesses. So if there are any gaps in your capabilities or expertise, you can always use an external assistance or collaborator. Find the right partner, as I said. Know the interest of the agency and the mechanism. You can also always call or speak or send an email to program officers in the relevant institute and make sure that the relevant solicitation that you found really fit their interest and of course your science project. Address the non-important admin parts, for example, deadlines, budget, PIs, the work that should be conducted in-house or outsourced, and etc. And establish yourself both as a top researcher as well as an experienced manager, and that's extremely important. How do we do that in FreeMind Group? Basically, we start by identifying all the relevant funding opportunities. Then we create a multi-submission granting strategy based on that list. And after we create a multi-submission granting strategy, the next thing that we do is we submit as many top quality applications as possible, because we know that the more you submit, the better are your chances. Thank you so much for attending the webinar today. I think it's a perfect time for questions. So let's see what we've got. Okay, so I don't think there are questions that I can, I don't think there are any questions at all. So let me send you, you can download the PDF of this presentation from, again, the handout section here. And I will send this slide to you tomorrow. The recording and the presentation will be also available on our website and our YouTube channel. Thank you all again for being here today, and I'm looking forward to, seeing you at our next webinar in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much.